Welcome to the Combat Learning Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Josh Peacock. Before I throw you into the episode, I launched a Substack, combatlearning.substack.com, and I have launched a series of articles that are companions to the book by Rob Gray, How We Learn to Move. So I take each chapter, I summarize it in my own words, and then I go into depth, applying it specifically to martial arts and combat sports, how it can make you a better coach, how it can make your understanding better, and of course, how to design better practices. So head on over to combatlearning.substack.com. And if you're not, sign up to the email list. Now, if you're already on the free email list, you're going to be getting emails through Substack from now on. And so if you want access to those companion articles and other articles such as, paper reviews, applying ecological and other types of science specifically to martial arts, most of those are going to be a part of a paid subscription. There's already a few of those up, and I'm about to release another one. So if you want access to those, it's $9 a month. That's the cheapest it's probably ever going to be. And in a little while, I'm actually going to raise the price up. So if you want to get on the paid newsletter and get access to all those different kinds of articles, those series and companion articles and paper reviews and all those sorts of things, make sure that you sign up as soon as possible because the price is going to go up. All right, guys, thank you. I will see you on the next episode. That dovetails again back to something I want to circle back to with coaching coaches ecologically, right? How do you train coaches to do what you do as an ecological coach or a constraints-led coach? And I would argue that it begins with when they're learners, like actually training them to recognize in themselves and their peers to help them notice and work through things on their own, become self-sufficient. But from a professional perspective, what do you do with the coaches that teach under you professionally to train them to do what you do?
100%. Great question. So it's interesting because, hey, I have now a long time of implementation. And what I had to do for my coaches in the early phase is very different from now. Okay. Because one of the most common friction points I see is if this was early in my implementation and I said, we want to do games in these areas, most times I found even my brown belts who are good, they win brown belt competitions, all that stuff, not confident in seeing what you see in jiu-jitsu. So they're initially going to have this thing where their understanding is different than their ability to communicate what they understand, right? What they physically know how and do and what decision makings run through their mind and how they engage. They haven't made that conscious, and we know it can't be all, but they haven't even thought of the grappling and engagement in that way. So that was the first hurdle for me. So in the beginning, when we started doing this, I was detailed in the sense of what I would give to the instructor. So I'm going to give you a lesson plan. Here's some of the key teaching points. Are you going to use them all? Are you going to use some? Are you going to use none? That's on you. But in the beginning, I was showing a lot of the teaching points because I'm trying to give them access to my eyes, at least initially. What's Kabir looking for? Oh, so we're highlighting precursors to actions. So in the beginning, I was very prescriptive. Not in the sense that they were going to go out and teach it that way, but I just wanted to think of what's Kabir emphasizing in this grappling engagement? Oh, the connections, the ability to reconnect when they break your grip. Those are things we want to talk about today. So I was fairly prescriptive, Over time, though, right, they recognized what we point attention to, not certain solutions, but what are the commonalities of good solutions, et cetera. So now, I can tell my coach, hey, we're going to play some rear body lock games, and they can sort of think in their head because they know in their head they have some set things. They know the easy things they can tweak. They can tweak okay, the level of connection that this person starts with on the rear body lock. Is it locked hands? Is it open hands? Is it here? Right? Same thing for the defender. Do they already have hands in place? Where are the connections? So, one thing we can change that really scales complexity is how connected is one player. Think of a seated guard. If I start you seated versus standing unattached, they know they can play, but hey, let's scale it up and get way more attachments to the bottom player. Or, so I started pointing out some of those common things. Okay, so one thing we can focus on is what is the connection, and we can play with generic goals, right? Other things we can play with is we can play with not common goals. Common goals meaning not the great result goal, get to the top position, but it could be what's a precursor? Get access to their hips, right? Get that. So like I'm teaching that like, hey, you can scale on the goal. The goal can be the easy thing that would score in an IBJJF tournament, or it could be small as getting an inside bicep tie, right? So I sort of taught them a little bit about thinking of that scaling because it's going to influence a lot of what happens, but it's an easy enough thing. They can think of it all the way from a zero action goal, maintain a certain stance, a certain configuration, etc., right? To maybe goals around creating a precursor, get their hand posted on their mat, get their elbow across the center line, get your head above their head, right? That's not an outcome in itself, but it's, so I've sort of like shown them, or I try to, hey, they might hear this like, fuck you, Kabir, you don't teach us shit. No, but hopefully, through the way that we approach things, they can see that there's different knobs that we adjust. And I try and make it, pretty stable. But then also I have like, that's a little bit of how I do it. And hopefully that makes sense. Of course, it can be like, hey, I dive through all the different things we tweak. But that's like the broad things. I had to first show them, how do you explain what you've been doing on autopilot? Because they didn't know that. And then once they realize, oh, the things I do on autopilot are all these little things. Which little thing do I want to emphasize today? Or the other side, which big broad idea is really important for them today? Now I can say, yo, Coach Kenny, we're doing standing rear body lock. We're going to do supine guard, sort of focused around like De La Hiva, reverse De La Hiva style attachments, right? And we're going to focus a little bit more on the top player. So we're going to be queuing mostly to improve top players' performance, not super concerned about bottom. And then we want to play some games around Kimuras, right? Whether that's, and then he has like categories of games he can think of. Is it maintenance games, entry games, exiting the games, upgrade, right? Like I play a lot of games where we talk about like upgrading, going from one attachment to a better attachment, So like, because they've gotten the exposure, they've seen them, they can start knowing quick, easy mods that they can play. Another thing is this format is the hardest to be overly prescriptive because the way I approach top half guard is going to be a different set of analysis that my small rooster weight purple belt approaches top half guard from, right? But he's going to have super valuable stuff to share because where he pays attention is valuable. Maybe not for everyone in the room, but for that, like it's just like how before, you show your variation of a technique. They're not showing a variation of a technique, but they're showing, hey, for me, as I come in this situation, these are my big priorities. I can't let them get access to So like it allowed for that to happen.
Sure. Yeah, it's fit. So there's so much going on with the ecological approach. You talked about there's things you're doing on autopilot. And if you take like what are the key tenets of ecological dynamics? Well, one of them is attunement, right? Perceptual attunement. What are you looking for? And so when you're thinking about how you can train instructors to do what you do and potentially even get even better at it than you are, is to make explicit what it is you're actually looking for whenever you just at any scale. What am I trying to do for a session plan? Once things are being executed and everyone's playing the game, what am I seeing? What am I looking for there? You can help to direct their attention as coaches to look for those things. And then in the process of that, they'll start to see their own things, right? They'll start to perceive their own things and they might be able to improve upon whatever your attunement is, how your attention is calibrated for coaching. they might start focusing on different pieces of information that turn out to be more useful about
Mm-hmm.
performance. Um, there's also like a retraining or a recalibration phase with, when you come from the traditional approach, you're virtually all you're looking for is errors to correct. It's just totally error
Yeah.
based learning almost, or error correction based. So the error tolerance is very low before you step in and make an intervention. But when somebody's playing from an ecological approach, someone's playing a game and they're navigating an environment, your error tolerance has to be much, much higher because you want them to make mistakes. You want them to go through the process and you want them to find functional answers. But the best way to find those functional solutions is to discover them on their own, right? And when you step in to make an intervention, it's either, just helping direct their attention or offering a little detail. So you have to understand that you talked about scaling focuses, right? That's what Greg was talking about that too in a previous episode. There's such a great way to approach helping a newer learner or a novice learner or a less skilled learner navigate a more complex game, right? Um, but you can ruin that if you think you have to totally change the activity or make lots of frequent interventions just because a learner is struggling, just because
Mm-hmm.
they're failing. And so like when I originally wrote the first article on scalable live training, and I was talking about understanding challenge point, and then understanding how you as an instructor interact with scaling at that challenge point. You have to look at everything that's the totality that's going on. You can't just look at the outcome. Oh, he's failing. He failed 2 times in a row. I need to scale this down. Not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily. What is his morale like? Is he
Mm-hmm.
engaged? It's okay if he's frustrated. Is he too frustrated? Is the quality of his movement taking a dunk or a dive rather, or is he re-engaging with the same vigor?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's okay to be frustrated when you're learning, right? You don't have to scale down necessarily because there's frustration. But if motivation is taking a hit, that's probably a good cue to step in. Or he's just being totally shut out, right? He's not finding anything functional. Those are for me, those are my broad principles for when a coach can understand when a scale down actually needs to happen, is not simply because there's a failure or simply because there's a lot of errors, but that there's a high probability that no learning's taking place because either motivation's taking a hit or there's a total shutout.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a tangent of mine, but
Sort
yeah.
of on that tangent, right? Because yeah, when you're really engaged with practice, you have to be monitoring challenge point, and you sort of touch it. You also have to sort of monitor like energy, like
Mm,
challenge is one thing, but like energy engagement is a different thing, right? Because I can have an unengaged group that's hitting the right challenge, that sucks, right? And I can have a super engaged group that's over challenged, etc.
yep.
But when you talk about scaling, like for me, I'm less likely to change an activity than I am to change with whom they do it. And I find
Mm,
oftentimes that is the simplest scale you can do
yep.
because we've all had an experience where I'm stuck with someone, and for whatever reason, either it's just a dud matchup. We'll call it a dud. Either, nothing is happening for me, or I'm doing it. It's just whatever. For whatever reason, it's just not clicking. You've done the same thing with different people, and for some reason, this was a better learning experience. That I found is like the easiest thing is like, let's just switch partners. Because switching partners can be like the fastest solution, and sometimes we shy away
Yep.
or we overuse it so much that they can never get accustomed to anything, but for me, I found one of the easiest scales is let's just switch partners. Or like, a funny way to scale it is, hey, you know what, instead of this being straight time for Josh, we're going to switch top and bottom every time an outcome happens. Little things like that. I don't have to change the activity. I just have to change either who you do it with Or like, how long is your turn? What's that like? Because, sometimes that person who's frustrated is because they've been in the bottom position for 3 minutes of this game and they personally don't know a solution yet or an idea of one. But maybe I could fix that just by having you guys switch top and bottom the whole time. So this is something I'll do a lot. We'll play the first round of a game. Josh has 2 minutes doing whatever it is, then I'll have 2 minutes. Then we'll play the same thing, flip-flopping. And it's like, oh, huge. Like that's my way to address the challenge, because the challenge point wasn't the activity. It was just their experience. Right. And they hadn't seen a skilled mover solve that thing, or not even a skilled mover, just anyone solve that problem. Right. And then, so like, I try and think of it in that way. Like there's other ways we can scale besides changing what the activity is, just how it's administered or with whom it's with.
Yeah. I like that. That was a little glimmer of session design there that I noticed. That is an excellent way to scale the intensity at different times in the session, because when you do it for like you get 2 minutes and the other person gets 2 minutes, right? There's a lot of exploring going on, and the outcomes don't matter as much. So there's the affectivity level, right? The anxiety level is a bit lower. But when you do the same thing again and you have to flip every time there's a change, now what you do is dependent on the outcome. So you might end up in a position you don't want to be in if you don't perform well. So now there's a little bit more intensity to that, and you almost notch it up one level of representativeness in that case. So the same game becomes virtually no change in parameters, becomes more useful and scaled up a little bit simply because of the format of the game.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. When I think of like practice
I like that a
design,
lot.
a lot of times my first activity, like a dumb weird thing, but like I don't know, imagine you're playing Street Fighter with like your little cousin. The first round, you let them mess around with the controls, and all you do is block and move around on top. Like it's like you try, like they don't even know how to jump yet. Let them jump, flounder, whatever. They get some straight time just to fuss about with the controls. Then let's add consequence. Sure, they lose in that first round or whatever the goal is. Like lots of times I think of that like, let's set up one game that's just like, what does X button do? And like go from there. So I'll play a game where like, I'm going to go on a tangent, but one of the best things that I've been doing a lot in practice, mainly from guard scenarios, is let me start in a certain attachment and I have to deny you from changing your stance. So if I start entangled in your legs, Delahiva or a single leg X, whatever, my goal is to not let you get down to both knees, but to also not let you completely flee my guard. And that's the first round of this activity, because now I'm just learning basic controls, if that makes sense, and that is sort of the precursor to having a good guard. If I can dictate where we play, super good. So I do that with a lot of things where we're just playing a game about controlling their stance, right? And like we'll do those type of things because it's a great way. Now they're ready for the next level with consequence, or the next level. We're now on bottom. You have a proactive way to win. Now you win by doing A, or things like that. There's just so many ways you can like make an effective activity. Stance has been a big thing for me recently, though, that I feel like it's all I've been talking about for the past like month and a half, 2 months here.
Stance, like posture.
Yeah, the alignment. We play so many games that are just about the shape. Okay, because the shape is the easiest thing to understand. If I know I just have to keep you from putting both knees on the floor, I can think of many ways, crude or graceful, to achieve that. But I know I just have to not let Josh make this shape. That's very approachable, no matter what your age, experience level is, right? And then I'll point your attention to the tools we use. We use grips, we use posts, we use hooks, we use the threat of me coming up or going under. Like, I'll share some of those ideas. So just playing games around that, I found has been like one of the fastest cheat codes for people to like learn guard. Because I have like new people play guard pretty well because now like, I just have to make sure I control where this goes, and their guard is like different innately. There's one really fun thing, tangent, but like you can really influence the style of play of someone through the constraints. Like we'll routinely play guard games where the bottom player loses if the top player can completely disconnect for 3 seconds. So then all my students will chase you if you try and run away from their guard because they always lose a game when that happens. But I know in the big sphere of grappling, to be able to be that type of person who applies pressure from the bottom, who chases people from their butt is like powerful, right? So like that's one of my favorite things. Like I can really create styles of play. And my curriculum now is not moves, it's styles of play that I try and emphasize and teach around and structure practice around.
Yeah.
Way better, I think.
Yeah.
Because it's just it's been our biggest thing. So I've like I've categorized everything into generic styles, but it's awesome that way. I'm saying like, hey, this is one way of passing. It's a loose high step style, and I'll create games that facilitate that. That will give you the skills. If you want to be a loose outside passer, that's the style of play. Okay, in a couple weeks, we're focusing on a body lock style of passing. So let's create activities that will give you skills that would help you be that type of player. We're not working on just body lock passing or, this is how you do it, but we're going to play the skills. So what are some of those skills? Whatever we decide on them, but we have a theme. We're just playing games to generate a style of play. Because sometimes I know for me, when I started, my games were to get you to do a particular sequence. My games were to regress you from a dogfight sweep, stage by stage by stage. Man, I spent that whole week and you didn't really like understand the whole game of half guard. You knew a sequence. Even though we did it live and you got a lot of touches, there still is a place for that. But if I had made all of our practice activities around a general style of play, hey, from half guard, it's about getting to the waist off an underhook. And everything was around creating that behavior that really lends to that whole type of game. That would be where I'd steer practice rather than what happens, on at the end of that, let's say.
Right. Yeah. Too many. Well, all kinds of great insights there. Let's see if I can highlight it for listeners. So, okay, the first one that I love is the way that you basically just took ecological psychology and translated it into something you can use as a coach, and that is the shape. That basically, in ecological psychology terms, we would say structure, visual structure.
Right.
That's and I use that a lot because I like to talk about what you see in terms of discernible structures. That's not friendly to kids, and it's not friendly to probably most people. And so what is friendly? The shape. Here's the shape. How can I apply this shape? And so from the perspective of somebody who is trying to manipulate a body for the purpose of grappling, the shape is a great thing to talk about. And you can self-organize behavior around that effect that you're looking for. What shape are you trying to make out of this person? And then from the perspective of somebody who's embodied, of the first person perspective, you can't look at your shape from a third person view. So we speak in terms of alignments, because you can feel where your body is through proprioception when your senses. That's the first thing I wanted to highlight, is how you've taken ecological psychology, which is very academic, and you've made it into something actionable for the way you coach and the way you cue your own athletes. The other thing is that you've designed your games around learning, or rather experimenting with strategies rather than individual tactics. Now, I hate the word strategy because it can mean almost anything. But if you use strategy and tactic together, you kind of understand the difference between the two. Styles of play is so much better. I love that term. So play styles of play, or patterns of play, these are all more interesting. They sound more fun, and they're much more digestible to the layman, I think. But yeah, that's such a great thing. Like building games around exploring a style of play rather than an individual sequence. Because that's always the pitfall when you first get into the constraints led approach, is that you're not thinking on a ecological enough of a scale, right? A grand or abstracted enough of a scale, you're still thinking in terms of individual techniques.
Right.
And as you're understanding, I went through I've talked about it before. I went through the same error cycle, the same journey. But as you get better at it, you start to think, well, how can I manipulate this constraints in a way that they have to explore this style of play
Hmm.
as opposed to a different style of play, discernible styles of play. And some people are going to click with some and others won't, but the experience is always useful, even if you don't adopt that style of play as a dominant style of play. So yeah, I just
Hmm.
wanted to highlight all that because that was a lot of great insight there. Rapid
Yeah.
fire.
One thing for me, style of play has been like my thing for, I don't know, last 4 to 6 months, been like big emphasis. A big benefit is now my students who are interested in grappling, they watch grapplers and they can see a style of play.
Mm, yep.
Right? This guy is mostly trying to always get under and entangle the legs. I know that style. I can see this guy is playing games to work there. Or I can see this guy is more of a body lock half guard pass. Like you can then see a game, right? Weird comparison. I don't know why I do it, but think of like your average random football fan. Bro, they can tell you every team's style of play, how they like to play, what it looks like. They
Yeah.
won't be able to tell you their playbook, every single running play that they call, but they will be able to tell you this team is a smash mouth power running team. There's a ton of plays that make up that effect, but that's how they try to play the game, right? And I think it's very similar to jiu-jitsu. Like, hey, now we can watch a person like, this guy's a pressure passer. He does it from the split squat a lot. I can see that. I don't know all the things he likes to do, but I can observe and like see that, right? Because a big part of this is being able to know what you're looking at. What the fuck is this? It would be able to see and understand. And now, if I can teach you to know what you're seeing, like even if you suck, like even like I'm sure I have a new student last night who's here for my knee shield half guard unit sort of thing. And they know that, hey, in here, there's generally two ways this person's going to try and take this game. They're going to either try and play an underhook, wrestle uppy half guard, or they're going to try and enter the legs. Third thing is they're going to try and exit the half guard scenario altogether to an open guard. So now they can see that. And then when they watch, like, oh, this guy from here, he tries to go this path a lot. Like that's my goal a lot is can I show you all the different ways that people try and approach it? Because then you can dive in the nitty gritty. Because now you saw a guy who plays this way. Let's see what he does. Because he probably talks about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And now your understanding of the technical aspects of the game is upgraded because instead of thinking in terms of technique, counter technique, counter technique, counter, right? And instructors are
Mm-hmm.
always talking about there's always a counter to the technique and a counter to the counter and a counter to the counter. Shut up, dude. Stop. If you can think in terms of pattern, well, this pattern of play tends to work really strongly against this pattern of play, right? First of all, we're not thinking in absolute terms. We're just thinking in terms
Mm-hmm.
of what's a strategy I can work with here to see what works and what doesn't work. Way more manageable because there's far fewer patterns of play than there are techniques and
Oh
variations
yeah.
in specific counters, right? Now you're thinking you're thinking more in principle terms, which is more of an attention directing exercise than what exactly you have to do with your body at any given moment. So I really like that. And for coaches, it helps you understand the game way better than just naming all the techniques.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
and going through the technique counter whole rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Is this something that do you walk your coaches through all the patterns of play that you have identified? Do you have like I hesitate to say taxonomy because somebody's going to get on my case about using that word. Have you classified the different dominant patterns of play? Is it written somewhere? Do you train your coaches on it?
Yes and no, in the sense that, like, okay, so I'm going to
Mhm.
have like 6 broad styles of guard play, 6 broad styles of passing, right? And they'll see how some of those play. So, like, for example, guard play. I'll just tell you once. We have half guard, right? We have closed guard scenarios. We have like De La Hiva, reverse De La Hiva style guards, which are from supine. You have X and single leg X type guards, which are from supine, right? You have a seated guard against a standing. You have a seat against a kneeling. Those are the 6 broad types of guard games that people are going to try and play. Within each of those, now you have a little sub style. Because, hey, the De La Hiva game, there's a couple ways people will play that. Some people are playing De La Hiva to create back exposure. That's their whole game. Some people are playing De La Hiva to wrestle up. That's their whole game. Some people are playing De La Hiva to enter underneath. And that's their whole game, right? So, like, sort of see it layers, but really broad. If I zoom out, I think like all of my coaches were like, yeah, that makes sense. There are sort of those 6 broad categories of guard play. However you want to sub-split it down, there's 6 styles. Passing. Hey, there's body lock passing. There's high step passing. There's float passing. There's split squat passing. There's high step passing. I don't know if I said that. There's a variety. There's basic loose passing. Toreando's there's not a lot of different ways of passing the guard when you zoom out to the style. There's a lot of different ways to pass the guard when you zoom into the technique. But to play a loose outside passing, I know there's a couple of skills I need. I need to be able to really control the connections and the engagements. I need to be able to be effective at north-south pinning, most likely, if I'm going to become a good outside passer. Things like that you can think of when you focus on what are sort of the requisites for that style of play to be, there. Yeah, so I love that idea. It's so much simpler. Because I don't have to teach you moves. It's from here, bro, you're trying to go here, here, or here. And then they know that and they can explore that if they want to. And most people don't want to explore it anyways. So I'm not going to give you a bunch of stuff that you don't care about too much on the same, same sort of note.
At many points, I've been drilling a technique that I just super don't want to drill. And I'm like, as soon as we get to rolling, I'm not even going to try. I'm actively going to throw this out. I'm going to try and never, because it's just whatever it is. It's like, well, I roll with big guys and I just don't want to do whatever this thing is because it places me directly under their weight for some reason. Right. So yeah, there's many times where I've been like, yeah, this is not for me. But if it's a style of play, there might be other things I can do that fit within that style of play. That's not the individual technique. I didn't really used to do like body lock passing before. I did more of the loose passing. But when I just got the chance to just play around a lot, I found out that I kind of liked body lock passing. But I do different things with it than, somebody who's I'm not a big guy. So a bigger guy is going to do different things with a body lock passing game than I would. But I didn't know that I liked body lock passing because I was always taught techniques that were more oriented at somebody who's bigger. They can do more stuff with pressure and they have a broader frame and they have better leverage when they, align themselves certain ways. So yeah, for sure. Fascinating concept to think in terms of patterns of play or styles of play instead of individual techniques. Thanks so much for listening to the Combat Learning Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, remember to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or your podcatcher of choice. It really helps us out. Finally, this episode, including the intro music, is produced by Micah Peacock. Thanks in advance, and I'll see you on the next episode.